very much, Mary, and thank you also for putting a fantastic conference together. And may I start with referring, it was just there, the code of conduct, but you have seen it many, many times. Be nice to each other. I think, at least my experience, but you've been very nice so far, so let's keep it like that in the final session. I'm Bart van Ark. I'm Professor of Productivity Studies at the University of Manchester, so I feel really great being in between this productivity session and the session on AI, because we can now become really positive and say, well, okay, there may be many problems, but here is AI and it's going to solve everything. Now, that's of course what we will discuss. It's a topic of great interest. Clearly, artificial intelligence is getting us on a new trajectory of innovation performance. It's a general purpose technology that will have vast implications for the economy, and it could create a step change in productivity growth, relating back to the previous session. Now, throughout this conference, we have seen quite a few papers discussing various impacts of AI on the economy. But I was particularly struck about how many papers are already using artificial intelligence. I think I've seen dozens of papers of researchers using AI tools and machine learning and natural language processing kind of techniques to do this. So it's already become part of our toolbox of doing research. And in this light, I would like to go back to the session we had on Monday in memory of Nick Crafts, former president in 2022-2023. And the organizers during that session played a podcast, which I think was probably one of the last public performances of Nick, in which he shared his thoughts as an economic historian, surprisingly perhaps, on the future of artificial intelligence. And what Nick said about AI, I found quite striking. Because not only did he think that AI qualified as a general purpose technology, but he also said he could see it as the beginning of a new industrial revolution. If you define an industrial revolution as a new system of invention, a change in the way the technological process comes about, and delivering new methods of research, as we have been seeing in this conference. Now, for an economic historian like Nick, who many of us have known as a scholar who's empirically driven, was very thoughtful and measured in his commentary, this is quite something to say. At the same time, he lived up to his economic history background and said, I'm not 100% confident we'll get the productivity effects, but it is a possibility, and I think it is that possibility we're going to talk about today. Surely one reason to be cautious is that the effects of AI are going well beyond the economy. It will change the way that human beings are engaging with technology. It can have already having big effects on worker displacement, on future employment opportunities, on inequalities. So we need to think about a new regulatory regime that will be necessary to maximize the gains, but also ensure the benefits of AI will be enjoyed by many. So, in this final session, we're going to expand our thinking on how best to adapt to this new technology. And with three fantastic panelists, our first speaker is going to be Zana Zenko. Zana's sitting on the left side. She's a principal economist in the chief economist team at Google, so she's one of those superstar firms that we're talking about in these meetings. And she's focusing in her work on competition and regulatory issues in AI, as well as other digital markets. And previously, she worked as a data scientist at Spotify and was a technical specialist in economics at the Financial Conduct Authority. And Zana will kick off in a minute, speaking about some of the key technological and economic features of AI to fully comprehend its effects. Then she will be followed by Carl Benedict Frey, who you don't see on the stage, who was trying to get here today, but got a flight problem. So he will be joining us online. I can see him right there, and he will appear. Oh, there he is. He is on the screen. Carl is the Dieter Schwartz Associate Professor of AI and work at the Oxford Internet Institute and a fellow at Mansfield College in Oxford. He's the director of the Future of Work program in the Oxford Martin School. And in 2013, he co-authored the book titled The Future of Employment, How Susceptible Are Jobs to Computerization. And just recently, his new book has appeared, The Technology Trap, Capital, Labor, Empowering the Age of Automation. And Carl will speak about some of the labor market and inequality effects of artificial intelligence. And then last but not least, we're going back to the people here on stage. We will hear from Cosmina Dorobantu. And Cosmina is the co-director and co-founder of the Public Policy Program at the Alan Turing Institute. She's a member of the UK's Government Trade and Economy panel in the Department for Business and Trade, and she's a member of the Mayor of London's Data for London board. Prior to touring, she was also an executive director and co-founder of Aurora Energy Research. And Cosmina will speak in particular about the regulatory aspects of AI. So we got a great panel talking about some of the features of AI, economic and technological, labor market and inequality effects, as well as the regulatory environment. So a lot to cover. So without any further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Zana.
Being here, and I just wanted to start by thanking the organizers, thanking everyone for putting the panel together. It's really an exciting technology. It's an exciting time to be talking about it. I also wanted to make it clear that while I'm talking about it, I'm not exactly being a spokesperson for Google in any way. It's just my personal views, and that I'm quite excited to be talking about. So, with those completely unofficial, unattributable, whatever views in mind, I just wanted to start by laying down some general concepts that we're dealing with here. Over the past year and a half or so, a lot of public imagination has really been captured by the ChatGPT and various chatbots that followed, the fluidity of the interacting with almost like a being that wasn't there, but that was producing text, producing apparently creative outputs, etc. So the public attention has really focused on these text generative AI models in particular, or to some extent also on image generation. But I want to remind people, that everyone, that as economists, we really are better off thinking about AI as a much broader concept that encompasses some of the other things that I believe might have an equally important or even greater impact on the economic growth and productivity in the years to come. So, what do we mean by AI? It goes back to the concept of intelligence, which is, the ability to learn, ability to perform suitable tasks in pursuit of goals as circumstances might be changing and uncertain. Which is why, if you program a factory assembly line robot that does perform certain tasks perfectly, but can't respond if there's a duck on the conveyor belt, that's robotics, but it's not artificial intelligence. That's not intelligence. So artificial intelligence is a body of techniques that tries to capture some of these aspects that human intelligence has through programmatic and sometimes quite inductive means. As Bert has mentioned, we have machine learning of various kinds where derive data, transform data into predictions. It's a bit debatable where we draw a line, where it's AI, where it's statistics, but this is angels and pinheads. There are some aspects of machine learning that's really, really complex, that are unsupervised and make predictions that are very context dependent, so it's worth bearing that in mind. There are also a lot of underlying concepts and technologies that are worth bearing in mind, which are the idea of deep learning, so the neural networks, where in essence they're inspired by the structure of human brain, although in a very rudimentary sense, and they try to map, mimic the learning from data to decisions in this sort of very black box, but in some contexts extremely effective way. And then another aspect that is worth bearing in mind as well, which I'm sometimes particularly excited about, I suppose, is the idea of reinforcement learning. We are actually getting to the point where, well, we have been at this point for a while, but we're getting better and better at it. But we're getting to the point where it's possible to program machines to learn from experience. So you program machines to perform with certain objectives and constraints, etc. and let them figure out how to actually put this into a specific set of actions by trying and failing like humans do. And that's particularly exciting because this is a technology that's really coming into its own in a variety of applications of a kind that I think might be very applicable to the Industrial Revolution point that was made earlier. So with this sort of toolbox of things in mind, I suppose it also bears mentioning that look, these AI technologies are used in a myriad of ways across myriad of sort of industries. They are, I think, as far as last I checked, thousands of AI startups across the world alone, including large companies. There are big AI players in a variety of specific industries as well. And there are also kind of stages of production. So there might be foundational models, there might be fine-tuning steps, there might be applications to particular contexts, there might be further steps that combine the different models or different AI techniques to make decisions in a much more narrower point. So with that in mind, as a microeconomist by training, I do want to help remind people that it is not very meaningful to talk about the market for AI as well. We sometimes hear references to it, but as economists, we should try to keep our sort of concepts clear. And there's no more market for AI than there is a market for metal or something. Metal is what stage of refinement are you talking about? What is it feeding into, etc. So luckily for us, we are talking about very big picture issues in this panel, so we can get away with talking about AI as a whole, AI as a technology and its potential for the economy, which is great because the nitty-gritty of trying to figure out what the markets are in AI is not a task I want to be spending 10 minutes doing. It's probably a decade worth of work. So just moving on then. So with these all technologies that we have at our disposal, we can quite clearly see, I think, given possibly some of the talks that you've heard already, unfortunately, that there is AI techniques as a combination do appear to fit the definition of kind of this general purpose technologies quite well. And as I suspect you will have heard, this is what we tend to get excited about when we talk about the potential for long-term growth, because general purpose technologies are sort of transformative innovations that really change how whole economies work. And they tend to be defined by satisfying three conditions, loosely speaking, so broad availability, spillovers in innovation, and sort of substantial and sustained impact. And I'm just going to spend the rest of this talk fleshing out why I do believe very strongly that AI techniques fit the bill very well. So in terms of broad applicability, I think one of the areas that's quite interesting to me is the area of computer vision and object recognition and things like that. And this is a technique that is currently actually being used from inventory stock monitoring in factories to making better diagnosis using healthcare kind of imaging to things that are very dear to my heart, like conservation efforts, where you use videos and camera traps at immense scale to try to monitor populations of endangered animals. And it's fundamentally the same technology at play, but it's just applied to very, very different tasks with very productive effects. Likewise, a lot of the forecasting improvements that we're seeing are applicable to weather forecasting, which in itself is a huge topic, especially with the issues of climate change that we're all facing, and predicting weather better affects a lot of industries beyond farming, transportation, etc. There is also, there are applications in finance, there are applications in business capacity planning, etc. It's really, really widely relevant. And of course, something that more of us will be closely familiar with is language generation and kind of natural language processing tools. And again, in particular, I think very interestingly, translation tools that are AI-powered. Those have capacity to automate a lot of the routine drafting, meeting minutes, text summarization tasks, etc., essentially leaving quite a lot of more space for people to make decisions with the information that has been provided. And the translation element is also very useful because that can, geopolitics aside, really be a driver for considerable boost to global trade, because now even small, medium businesses can correspond directly with each other and conduct quite sophisticated discussions. Will be in not too long future, I believe. In terms of spillovers in innovation, which is another criterion, I guess the easiest thing to focus on is the fact that it is blatantly obvious that some of the even existing AI tools are great for improving coding, efficiency of coding, speed, error, verification, etc. And ability to code and programming is a driving force for a lot of ICT-based innovation, not just in future AI technologies, but also basically anything we do with computers. More efficient software engineering frees up researcher capacity to do other things. So that is, there is potential there. Another thing that I was very excited to see when it happened, and I've seen it in some other applications, is that now AI techniques can help us develop better AI, which one application of this is NVIDIA, the chip maker, using reinforcement learning essentially to help refine the design of its next generation of chips, which we then use currently as or many of us use to train frontier AI models. So, you're kind of using AI techniques to make things that better. And there are many other applications which we can defer to questions. In terms of other areas of research, again, these AI models have been able to drive breakthroughs in how we model and understand protein structures, for instance, and that's been a driver of a lot of medical and scientific research since. In terms of significant and sustained improvements, what I've described to you now already sounds like quite a big deal, but it is also, there are ample reasons to believe that there will be further improvement in terms of improving efficiency, better sparse models, creative ways of fine-tuning, etc. So there's no massive reason to believe that the improvements that we've seen to date will peter out very soon. So I think we are at time, so I shall pass on to.
Thanks very much, Sana. Well, that's a good start to look at all the potential that is there. Let's go to Carl, if we can get him on the screen. I can see him there on the screen, so I'm sure that he will come here and give his view, particularly focused on sort of labor market effects, as well as the impact of inequality. And Carl, you've been seen, so go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bob. I can't hear you too well, but I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I do apologize in advance if I repeat something from the previous presentation, which I fortunately couldn't hear. I would love to be with you in Belfast, but unfortunately British Airways thought it might be better if I stay in Oslo. But nonetheless, I hope that you can hear me, and I hope to be able to share with you some of my thoughts about both question is whether artificial intelligence constitutes a continuation of that process or potentially a reversal of it. And I think there are some encouraging findings in a number of experimental studies looking at generative AI and its impact on both productivity and income. And what they do seem to suggest is that regardless of whether you look at things like writing or coding or repetitive customer services, it seems to be that novices and relatively low-skilled workers benefit disproportionately. That is perhaps not that surprising. After all, technology like ChatGPT has been trained on the bulk of the internet. It essentially tries to predict the next token in a sentence, and because it draws upon a vast data set of the bulk of the population, it tends to sort of converse more or less towards that. Dostoevsky would not have benefited a great deal from ChatGPT. Myself, as a very good writer, benefited a lot more from it. So, to some degree, it's almost, I could argue, average by design. And what we do also know from a number of studies is that it predominantly memorizes rather than generalizes. So if you look at, for example, the cutoff date up until which these models have been trained, and you feed it exam questions, and we will know all the sorts of exams that generative AI has done very well at, but it does significantly less well if it's a fairly question that wasn't available to it during training. So it seems that these algorithms do struggle when novel circumstances emerge, and that seems to be a domain where even workers still hold the comparative advantage. But of course, most of the things that we do are fairly routine, and so there are good reasons to be optimistic about the ability of generative AI, in particular, to elevate workers to average levels of skill in a variety of tasks. The question is then whether that will lead to a reduction in wage inequality. And I think here it really depends on what your unit of analysis is. Because one thing that has happened with the COVID-19 pandemic is that more and more people are working from home. And if you can work remote, you work from anywhere. And if you look at the wage differentials, for example, between an accountant in New York City and an accountant in, let's say, Cairo, the wage differential is in the order of magnitude. And clearly, that in part reflects differences in productivity. But if you now have an equalizing technology like generative AI, it is possible that going forward we will see a fairly significant increase in offshoring as a consequence, which would obviously be good in terms of reducing inequality globally, potentially, but not necessarily within countries. So, to cut a long story short, I don't know how this will develop, but at least I hope that this has provided a framework of thinking about these issues going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carl. That was really good as an addition to the earlier setting of the stage, and it helps us to balance the positive and the concerning effects, although you also, like when I quoted Nick Crafts earlier, we really don't know what the effects are going to be, but it's good to categorize and catalog what the possible effects are going to do. Now, the last presentation by Kasmina is bringing in the regulatory aspect, because we, of course, do realize that this technology is very likely to fail if we don't have a proper regulatory environment about it, and she has studied it in detail. And you have some slides, so
yes,
if you want to go over there, please do so.
Super. Look, it is lovely to be here, and thank you so much for giving me 15 minutes of your time to tell you where we are on AI regulation. But I do think it's important that, for me to be able to tell you where we are, for us all to remember where we came from and where we started. And every time I sort of see a room like this, it makes me wonder, how did all of us become interested in AI? And, if I were to ask you, I'm sure there are fascinating stories about sort of the story or the AI moment that captured your imagination and brought you to where you are today. For me, the first sort of wow moment, the first time I dropped everything for an AI story and just followed it was Lee Sedol's series of games against AlphaGo. And there was something sort of almost surreal and yet so captivating about seeing those games of Go play in front of the world between one of the best players ever and a computer program developed by DeepMind. Now, those games feel like forever and a lifetime ago, but they only took place 8 years ago, actually almost precisely 8 years ago, between the 9th and the 15th of March 2016. That's not a long time ago, and I think we often forget that AI has not been a part of our daily lives for all that long. Now, interestingly, as our interest in AI grew, governments also started being interested in this brave new wave of technology. Now, the graph you see shows you the number of UK government publications that mention artificial intelligence. In 2015, the year before the famous Go games, AI was mentioned a total of 7 times in UK government publications. Last year, in 2023, it was mentioned 608 times. And this is important because governments absolutely need to think not only about how to encourage AI innovation, but also how to regulate AI. Now, if AI regulation interests you, this is a tremendously exciting time to be alive. As governments' interest in AI grew and as the benefits of risks in AI are becoming clearer, some of the brightest minds in the world have turned their attention to the question of how do you regulate those technologies. And the reason this is an exciting time to be alive is that we are at the point at which we are starting to see the results of all that work. So what has been happening around the world? Well, China was one of the first countries to implement AI regulations. On the very last day of 2021, the Cybersecurity Administration of China passed one of the world's first binding national regulations to rein in the use and misuse of recommender system. More legislation followed, including the 2023 measures for the management of generative AI. In October 2023, President Biden issued the landmark executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. Just 2 weeks ago, the European Parliament passed the EU AI Act, which is the world's first comprehensive AI law. Brazil is on its 4th proposal for a comprehensive AI bill, following closely the EU AI Act, actually. The UK government published in January of this year its response to a pro-innovation approach to AI regulation consultation. Singapore has released a wealth of voluntary governance frameworks for AI. India is working on a digital act to replace its now 24-year-old IT Act. And apart from these many sort of national levels initiatives and a ton of others that are not on this slide, there are also multinational efforts with organizations like the UN, the African Union, and the Council of Europe working on multilateral AI governance frameworks. Now, we only have a very short time together, so we won't get to cover them all. But I thought that a quick look at the EU and the UK in the minutes that we have left will give you a good idea of the range of options that are on the table at the moment when it comes to AI regulation. Now, what is the EU doing? So what's interesting about the EU is that it basically started from the idea that we've heard here today that AI is a general purpose technology that feeds into almost everything. It underpins a huge variety of functions. And what you have on the slides are just a few of the uses of AI within the financial sector, which is one sort of tiny area of our vast world. And what you can see is that even within this tiny area, AI feeds into everything from email spam filters to credit decisions. Now, the other basic idea behind the EU approach is that some AI uses are low risk and uncontroversial. So, not very many of us care, for example, that AI is powering our email spam filters. But a lot of people care that AI is feeding into our credit scores, and rightfully so. So starting from these two basic ideas, that AI can be used in everything, that some uses are almost risk-free while others are very high risk, the EU decided to produce this piece of legislation, the EU AI Act, which classifies AI systems according to risk. So what you have is minimal risk AI systems, and the EU claims that the majority of AI applications currently available in the single market, such as AI-enabled video games and spam filters, are free to function as they are, and there's no need to worry about them. Now, limited risk AI systems, which interestingly, in the first version of the Act, and it still includes sort of this reference to chatbots, although ChatGPT in the meantime was taken out of this box and put under a new sort of paragraph, well, huge section actually, about generative AI guidance. But limited risk AI systems are subject to light transparency obligations, and developers and deployers mostly need to ensure that end users are aware that they're interacting with AI. The vast majority of the EU AI Act, and there are about 460 pages of it, is about these high-risk systems. There's a lot of detail on how a system might be classified as high risk. And when an AI system is classified as high risk, the system's providers have a fairly long list of obligations, including establishing a risk management system and a quality management system for them. And last but not least, the EU AI Act believes that there are some systems, such as social scoring systems, that are not okay and should never be used in the Union, as they pose an unacceptable risk, and these are prohibited altogether. Now, the interesting thing about the EU AI Act, and one thing to keep in mind, is that it applies to all AI systems, regardless of the sector in which they are used. So the precise wording in the Act is that it covers all AI systems placed or used within the EU. Now, there are some buzzwords that you'll hear an awful lot when you hear the European approach to AI regulation. One of them is that it is rules-based, and what that means is that it sets some new rules that establish obligations for providers and users depending on the level of risk. You also hear that it introduced new legislation, and with it, it introduced heavy penalties. So non-compliance with the rules would lead to fines ranging from 7.5 million euros or 1.5% of global turnover to 35 million or 7% of global turnover. Now, keep in mind that for large companies like Google or Microsoft, 7% of global turnover can be in the billions. And you'll also hear the EU approach described as horizontal legislation, and again, that's because it applies to all AI systems right across the board. Now, what about the UK? Well, you might or might not be surprised to know that it decided to take a different approach to AI regulation from the EU. It decided to go for a principles-based approach. So 5 core principles underpin the UK's approach to AI regulation. The first one is safety, security, and robustness. The second one is appropriate transparency and explainability. The third one is fairness. Fourth is accountability and governance. And fifth is contestability and redress. So why the principle-based approach? Well, The idea behind principles-based regulation is that you need something more flexible than if-then rules for the very technology that is allowing us these days to move away from if-then rules. So principles give firms and regulators more freedom. So creative compliance is the term to describe a principles-based regulation as opposed to the much less exciting tick box compliance that defines the rules-based approach. And also there's an idea that principles-based regulation does not need frequent updating unless the sort of, unlike the rules in case new products or developments come online. The UK has opted to not put the principles on a statutory footing, and it also opted for a vertical approach. And the idea behind the vertical approach is that an AI system in health is very different from an AI system in financial services. And really, to be able to regulate these two, you should rely on the deep sectoral expertise of the existing regulators rather than coming with some sort of cross-cutting piece of legislation. So that's where we're at. But a really important question to ask when you look at the rhetoric and the terms that we use to describe these two approaches is, are they really diametrically opposed? And the answer is, they are different, but there is common ground, and it is incredibly encouraging to see that as time passes, we do see them slowly converging towards a healthier middle. So what are the points of commonality? Well, both approaches are actually risk-based. So the level of risk provides the sliding scale that determines to what extent the principles and the rules apply. The UK, despite it saying that it's not going for new legislation, the UK government is signaling that it might introduce legislation. So actually, the precise wording in the government communication is, we will not put these principles on a statutory footing initially. So they're giving themselves quite a bit of room for maneuver there. And finally, about this idea of the horizontal and vertical approach, look, the EU was very keen on going horizontal, but actually, if you read the Act, it did include some sector-specific guidance, as it should have. And for example, educational, vocational training, or law enforcement do get, sector-level guidance in the Act. And the UK, although it says that it will rely on sectoral regulators, it has conceded that it will need a centralized function to bring all of these regulators together. So that's all actually really great to see, because international cooperation in this space is absolutely crucial. Now, what is next? Well, that's the sort of billion-dollar question. We don't really know, but we're going to learn an awful lot over the coming years. What will we learn? Well, we will learn a lot more about international convergence. Is there anything that we will be able to agree on globally? Who's going to side with whom and to what extent? And that will be a tremendously interesting space to watch. We'll also learn an awful lot about implementation. This is where the rubber hits the road, and every single jurisdiction is going to struggle massively. So you might think that the EU, for example, is going to have an easy ride because it has those sort of clear rules and legislation. But actually, within the EU, each EU member state will get to decide how it will regulate AI in line with the EU-wide legislation. So it'll be interesting to see how each member state will approach this. Some might rely on their existing authorities, like data protection authorities, for example. Some might set up completely new AI regulators. We don't know. We'll see. You might think that the UK will have an easier time, as it doesn't have 27 member states. But the UK will need to get all of its regulators to sing from the same song sheet, and that is really complicated. And just to give you an idea of how challenging that is, we don't even know how many regulators there are in the UK. And that's not because it's some highly guarded state secret. It's because the system is so complex that no one yet has managed to map it. So if any of you is looking for a research project with high policy impact, this would be it. We know broadly that there are more than 100 regulators. Some of them have thousands of employees. Some of them have one single person sitting somewhere in the UK. So, you know, getting them to agree and implement whatever we decide to implement is going to be a challenge. And finally, last but not least, I cannot stress this enough as well. We will need to learn about the economic consequences of whatever regulations we decide to put in place now. We know close to nothing about that, and I hope that some of you in the room might turn your attention. This is the very definition of flying blind. We have no data. I'll leave you with that. Hopefully that has given you some food for thought. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. And that applause is for all three presentations. So we've got a lot on the table here. And while I'm scanning the room a little bit to see if questions are there, raise your hand, because there will be a mic. Let me sort of start warming up a little bit here and ask the two of you the question. And I'm not sure we can get Carl back in. So when you have questions for Carl, you may just have to phrase it as a thought rather than as a question, because he may not be able to answer. But I want to make a link between the previous session and this session. Because a lot about the effects of a new technology on economic growth or on productivity or whatever metric you want to use, or labor market and declining inequality, depends on the joining up of resources. There's no silver bullets. We heard in the previous session, it's about investments, it's about skills, it's about an innovation system that works, or at a national and a regional level, it's about a regulatory framework, as we have just been discussing. What, in your view, is kind of the key inhibitor, barrier, that you think, in terms of joining up, that is necessary to be, the barrier that needs to be lifted in order to get AI do for the economy what it should be doing? What would you pick as the one that you would want to focus on? Realize there's no one silver bullet, but what would you want to emphasize? Susanna, can I start with you?
That's a very nice question to start with. I hope this is going to get easier from here. But basically, it's, in some sense, it's just actually even too early to tell what the biggest roadblocks are. The reality is that we are seeing a lot of potential, but I would agree with Nick that we're not quite sure where exactly the potential, the most productive uses, the most important applications are going to be yet. And those logically would be the ones that you'd want to unblock, but I don't think we have figured it out. So in kind of in general terms, I could think that I could think that we need to be quite careful not to over-regulate. That often can snuff out innovation before it even happens. But again, there's an obvious need to balance safety and economic growth. So, but that's just my 5 cents.
Cosmina.
I think a lot of this is in the sort of boring details, if you will. You know, so you go and talk to banks, and banks will tell you, well, we have so much data about our customers, and we have all of their financial transactions, and you know, we're going to have this digital twin of each customer, and it's going to be amazing. But once you actually start to look inside banks, their infrastructure is so outdated, and they can barely get even the most basic data out of their system. So actually, getting that data AI ready requires a massive investment. And they don't want to undertake that investment because they don't know yet how the regulator is going to feel about this. You know, is it worth undertaking that investment if within a couple of years' time that's going to get outlawed? If you look in other places like health, for example, you know, you can think of so many ways in which you can save doctors' time. You know, I mean, estimates range between 20 and 50% of GP's time is taken up with administrative work. So you can think that you can automate some of that with, you know, not the sort of, you know, high level, whatever form of AI, but just some really basic improvements that won't save, you know, 50% of their time, but 5% of their time, and that's going to make a massive improvement. building that tool, you know, you can build it with a postdoc in 6 months, rolling it out across the NHS, you know, that will take 20 years, you know. So a lot of these sort of productivity improvements are stuck in the boring bits that nobody really wants to talk about.
I think actually one thing that comes out in both of these to some extent is the legacy infrastructure and the need to overcome the barriers that it creates because there is a very considerable fixed cost that is incurred when you deal with this, and there has to be some assurance of benefits and some realistic way of doing it.
Just looking at the technicians, but I don't think we can hear from Carl, can we? No, we can, I'm sorry. So there's one question over here. Let's take 2 or 3 questions, and then we do another round of answering, and so we can get in many questions. So raise your hand if you have a question. There's one at the back, there's one here. Okay, got you.
Okay, so I'm an economic historian, and I look at disasters and catastrophes in the past. I was brought up on Star Trek, Terminator, Battlestar Galactica, all those sorts of things. What's the worst case scenario? You know, is it a Skynet? What should we be worried about? And what kind of regulatory system can guard against that? Can it at all? What is the economic catastrophe that's waiting for us with AI that we have to really consider carefully when making all these decisions?
Okay, let's get that one out of the way, the most negative scenario. So let's go there. And in the meanwhile, if you can walk over there, the gentleman over there has then the next question. But if you can start answering. Cosmina, do you want to go first?
Sure. Look, there's a lot of, and people are talking more and more about sort of like the catastrophic scenarios, and, if there's even a remote possibility of a catastrophic scenario, some people should be turning their attention to that. And I think that's right. All of us turning our attention to that is not quite right. And actually, I am a bit concerned, especially, some of the language that we're hearing about sort of existential risk and diverts is very disempowering, right? So, I mean, if you sit around and you think, well, this is all going to kill us, what's the point of working on it anymore, right? And they're actually sort of like tangible negative impacts that we see nowadays, so with bias and discrimination and stuff like that are much more tangible and empowering, and we can work on them. So I would want, the efforts directed to the catastrophic risk to be proportional to the probability of that risk, So, if there's a 5% probability that, our economies are going to collapse or that we're going to die as a human race, that I think 5 of us should devote our attention to that, and 95% of us should sort of fix whatever we have in this world that we inhabit these days. But yeah, that's just my view on that.
Sanna?
Yeah, sure. So I like science fiction too, but I think from the point of view of, you kind of link that, the catastrophic scenarios, which are really interesting to dream up in principle, with what should we be doing about this in terms of regulation. And I think that link for me doesn't necessarily exist. There are so many really tiny probability of risks that are not worth mitigating. Skynet could emerge from the next iteration of OpenAI, but it most certainly won't, right? And so I agree with Cosmina that we should be spending more time dealing with things that are more present, and of course, and identifying catastrophic risks, trying to gauge their probability reasonably, but not letting that kind of take over the whole debate.
Great. Gentleman at the back there in the black shirt, yes, please.
Thank you, and I definitely am with you guys on the existential risk question, but unfortunately I'm also going to come with a rather negative question as well. And whilst I agree and really can see the benefits in productivity that we can get from generative AI, one thing that kind of troubles me is that given that we assume that we're the ones in charge, which we are, generative AI helps us execute tasks a lot more effectively and with a lot more competence. but it doesn't necessarily give any, this has no impact on the quality or even the morality of the strategies and policies that we are executing. And so this can lead us to a position, if you think about government or you think about large corporation, where we're effectively using Gen AI to make bad ideas reality faster. And so what I'd like to know from you guys is, what are your thoughts around that, and what methods, both in terms of regulation and also technological or other approaches, can we do to defend against such a situation?
Yes, I think it's a variant of the question about how we move from replacing or perhaps enhancing to enabling, to use Carl's kind of
I have some views on that. So I think what you've identified is interesting, because to me there is a very clear distinction between a tool and the root cause. So the situation you seem to have described is that we have a situation that gives rise to bad ideas that can be put in practice, and then the AI tool is just what makes it happen faster. I think generally speaking, it seems like, again, from the kind of welfare perspective, it seems to be more worthwhile to be spending time to trying to thinking about how we improve decision making rather than how we handicap or how tools that make us put these decisions into practice. But I suppose that's just my take on this.
So that's a very interesting question, and we don't actually have the answer yet, right? So we're going to be finding our way through it. We're just talking last night, actually, that ChatGPT, the original versions of ChatGPT were in many ways much more exciting, right? They were a lot more creative and a lot more entertaining. So you can sort of like ask it questions, and it would give you wild answers, but it was creative. Now, we've criticized it so much, and rightfully so. It created some horrible things over time. We're putting more and more guardrails around it. Nowadays, it's sounding more and more like a computer that is speaking to you. You can actually identify a text written by ChatGPT quite easily nowadays. It's because we put so many sort of like little guardrails in place that it starts to sound robotic, because we're taking out sort of the creativity that was making it generate those wild things. And I think we will see that a little bit with all sorts of technologies. We're seeing that with driverless cars, for example, as well. It's becoming sort of clearer and clearer that, actually the way to have those things on the road is to have them on a little lane of their own that, resembles more like an automatic bus than a sort of free driving car. So it will be interesting to see, I think as a society we're shaping those technologies, the policies will play catch up. We're not ahead at the moment.
So let me put in the last question, and actually make a little bit of a link to the future, but also building a little bit on Richard's remarks in the previous session about the role of social skills. Given our new president-elect, Chris Pistorides, who's been talking a lot about the importance of social and creative skills for the use of AI. So we love to talk about, say, data scientists and everything, but we also know that's a small, relatively small, but very important group of people. But reflect a little bit on the role of the broader skill set that we need in our population. Creative skills, social skills, collaborative skills, and so on. How important are those going to be for the future of AI? And do you see particular sectors, particular applications where you think this is going to matter more than elsewhere? How important this is in creative industries, for example, versus manufacturing or service sectors industries that we're building about? So maybe you can reflect a little bit on that as a last question before we end this session and this conference. Who wants to start? Cosmina, do you want to start?
I can start. Look, I think we're talking, the very definition of artificial intelligence sort of, pits the technology against the human brain. And the way we've defined it over the years and the way we've created it is, this technology is that can do what human beings can do. And I really think the sort of potential for the technologies is to get it to do things that we cannot do. And that is a much more exciting way to think about it. And I will see, I want, rather than a sort of like competition between this like technology and the human mind, I really think we need to shift the view to seeing this as a collaboration. And if you actually want to see what happens if you try to replace humans with technology, there's one of our researchers at the Turing has done a lot of work on the attempt to replace carers with robots in Japan. And it is a most fascinating account of just how wrong it went. It didn't save people's time. Actually, it took time away from valuable social interaction, because those robots were taking just as long to do a poorer job, but the humans were setting them up as opposed to interacting with the elderly people that they were supposed to help. So anyways, interesting thought.
Yeah. Sanne.
Yes, so I actually tend to find, and I was just speaking to Richard about it just an hour ago, I tend to find that most jobs involve a vast amount of social skills and require a vast amount of social skills and sort of collaboration, etc., understanding other people's perspectives. And I think that's at the heart of pretty much any job I've done in my life, and it's certainly a perspective I've tested with other people. And that, I can't see how AI could even begin to replace that. So there are also, these skills are clearly going to continue being important, and are going to continue being the center of a lot of the jobs that we do. I think in terms of what's, my concern is that with some of the short-term excitement, we haven't yet figured out what is best to deploy AI on and what it can't do and what we should be trying to get it to do. So what it can do that we can't do and what we should be getting it to do. So my concern is that in the short term, we might overreact in trying to replace workers with AI a bit much, and then that will clearly showcase the parts of human skill set that are not replaceable, that will be relatively quickly remediated.
Great. Look, we're at the top of the hour. Actually, I see the sun occasionally come in, which is a very unique event for this conference. So before you go to the airport, you may actually pick up a little bit of sunshine. I go back to this word, we don't know, because when I was referring to this podcast by Nick Crafts early on, which you really should listen to, just look it up, Will Hunt and Nick Crafts, and you will find it. He said, also, I don't know, and as a matter of fact, that's not a real problem, because all general-purpose technologies take a time in order to see their results. What you have to do is not to overregulate, not to kill everything, not to try to know exactly what the outcome is going to be. Let it go, keep it tracking, keep monitoring it, look at its effects, do research it, which, with the new technology that we now have available, we can do significantly better. And that is exactly what this research community is going to do. So I'm pretty sure that next year we'll see a lot more papers that are using AI technologies in order to figure out what the impact of AI on the economy is going to be. Thanks very much. I'm really sorry for Carl. I hope he still hears us, but we not getting him in. That would have enriched it further. But Cosmina and Zana, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you all for coming and holding out until the last minute, and wish you good travel back. Thank you.
Thank you.